So we never got that snowball fight in that we were going to have.
We'll
if the snow doesn't melt, we can guarantee you a snowball fight tomorrow.
Big day tomorrow. It's National Anthem Day. We might have something up our sleeve for you.
I love it. Ooh. Join us. We'll see you. Have a good Saturday.
There are conservative speakers who wow the right, and then there is the President of the United States who electrifies the right. Today, it is Donald Trump's turn to wow at what has become known as the holy meeting grail of the conservative movement. They call it CPAC, and this morning, the President is paying a call on them, and today, we are there when he does. And when does being bipartisan get you in trouble? When Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez catches you voting with Republicans and vows to primary you if you do. Let's just say she's got a list. And we've got the House Deputy Chief Whip, Dan Kildee, on what he thinks about that list and her. And who says Amazon is gone? New York Governor Andrew Cuomo has a message for Jeff Bezos. Please come back. Pretty please? Why Republican New York City Council Minority Whip Joe Borelli fears it may be too little too late. And he's not blaming the governor. Guess who he is? And apparently Kim Jong-un thinks the third time will be the charm. Yeah, he wants another summit with President Trump. I want you to meet the former Assistant Secretary of State, who says not unless Kim does some big things now, before any big meeting ever, then Michael Cohen, Democratic rock star. Never mind, Donald Trump's former personal lawyer is going to prison for lying to Congress. Now he's all the rage in Congress. More hearings, more investigations, lots more questions. Republicans call it squeezing the lemon before this particular legal lemon is off to jail. But who is really getting squeezed? We report you just might want to hide. All that and Bernie Sanders in New York to compare childhoods with the President of the United States. And Money Maestro Dan Geltrude on the good financial karma around this President of the United States. Sure, the Dow's 9-week streak of gains has stopped. But when it comes to making money, that doesn't mean you have to. It is simpler than you think, as long as you think simply. He'll explain, because the Karma King of Cash is here on the show that's all about good karma, even when all the news isn't good. That's why we're here. That's why we're live. And that's why we are starting right now. All right, it has been a who's who of big conservative leaders addressing CPAC, but the biggest of all after a whirlwind week overseas and here at home is the President.
Later today, he's going to travel about 20 minutes away from here. This takes place at the National Harbor in Maryland. It's likely President Trump's last trip outside of D.C. this week, a week that he began by flying roughly 20 hours and landing in Hanoi, Vietnam on Tuesday. Talks with North Korean dictator Kim Jong-un ended early without any sort of major agreement. President Trump says they are still working towards something, but that signing something in Hanoi just wasn't the right move.
This just wouldn't have been good for our country, and frankly, he can look at it the same way. Maybe he can look at it the same way, but we get along really well. He's a different kind of a guy, and I just said, look, this isn't going to be working, so I have a feeling something down the line will happen, and it'll happen, it'll be good. They wanted to denuke certain areas, and I wanted everything. And the sanctions are there, and I didn't want to give up the sanctions unless we had a real program, and they're not ready for that.
North Korea denied asking for sanctions to be lifted in their entirety and said the country's foreign minister said that they asked for partial sanctions relief. A senior State Department official told reporters North Korea asked the U.S. to lift sanctions imposed by the UN Security Council back in March of 2016 and that the North Koreans wanted all of them lifted except for the ones having to do with armaments. The senior State Department official said that it would have been billions of dollars in sanction relief that would in effect put the U.S. in a position of subsidizing the ongoing development of North Korea's weapons of mass destruction. Still, the president is optimistic. He has officials on both sides of the aisle back on Capitol Hill saying that they think he made the right decision in walking away. Again, President Trump says that he still thinks he has a good relationship with Kim Jong-un and that they can get something done. We'll see if he has anything else to say about those talks, future talks, whatever, at CPAC a little later today. Neil?
All right, look forward to that. Ellison, thank you very much. Ellison Barber at the White House. Meanwhile, to the Democratic side, new reports of infighting among some Democrats as freshman Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez reportedly threatens to keep a list of her colleagues who dare vote across party lines. Fox News correspondent Jillian Turner has more from Washington. Jillian.
Good morning, Neil. So House Democrats faced a major test of their resolve a bit earlier this week when Republicans insisted a bill focused on gun background checks needed to include language on undocumented immigrants. Ultimately, House Republicans convinced 26 Democrats to cross party lines and join them by voting yes to amend this bill. This despite a clear warning from the Speaker of the House. Take a listen.
Vote no. Just vote no, because the fact is a vote yes is to give leverage to the other side, to surrender the leverage on the floor of the House.
Now Democrats are trying to circle the wagons, strategizing about new ways to prevent anything similar from ever happening again. The key, limiting the ability of Republicans to use a legislative tool known as an MTR, or a motion to recommit. The Republican minority's been relying on the MTR to force the Democrats' hand on major contentious issues like this week's gun bill. But preempting the Dems' intentions to mess with the MTR, the House Republican leader issued a stark warning.
Changes to the MTR would be a nuclear option, and it would leave a stain on this majority just 2 months in.
A spokesman for congressional Republicans took the opportunity to taunt House Democrats, saying, "Buckle up and grab your popcorn because Democratic infighting is already reaching a breaking point, and it's only month 2 of Democrats' House majority. Just wait until the intra-party primaries begin." Until that next round of primaries begins, though, House Democrats are proceeding apace with pushing through some major items on their agenda, like the resolution to strike down what they call President Trump's fake national emergency and legislation to protect public lands. Neil?
Jillian Turner, thank you very, very much. So House Democrats, what is going on here? And is there a division among the ranks? Who better to ask than the House Democrats' Chief Deputy Whip, Dan Kildee. Congressman, very good to have you.
Hey, thanks for having me back, Neil.
What do you think of what Congresswoman Cortez is reportedly doing, sir? That is, keeping a list of colleagues of yours who vote with Republicans, I guess on anything.
Well, first of all, she doesn't need to keep the list. It's all a matter of public record. Anybody who wants to look at a vote record can just look at it. So I think that part of it's a bit overstated. I don't think it's productive, however, for Democrats in one district to interfere with the politics or the voting decisions or the choices that are made by Democrats coming from other districts. We have a diverse party. We've got lots of different points of view. I do think we've kind of got wrapped around our axle on this issue of the MTR, the motion to recommit. It's a procedural tool that both parties have used, and I think it's a bit overstated in terms of how this is playing out. But no, I don't think it's productive for us to interfere in one another's politics. We each come from separate districts. We have our own constituents. We are responsible to those constituents, and we ought to leave it at that.
Congressman, all of this occurs at a time when many equate the face of the Democratic Party today, fairly or not, with the Congresswoman from New York. Do you think that's a mistake?
I do. I don't think any one member of our caucus is the face of the party. I'm the face of the party for the people of the 5th District of Michigan. We all have interest in what other members say, but we have diverse views. But especially with these new members, I think it's a bit of a misunderstanding of the makeup of the new Democratic majority. There are some really progressive voices, and certainly Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez is one of those. But there are also lots of really interesting new members who come with a national security background, for example. Lots of military veterans comprise our new majority. So no one person can say they are the face of our party. We have a diverse party, lots of points of view, and I think that's fine.
You've been known as a fellow who tries to work with the other side, even the disparate sides within your own party, but that almost seems to be a cliche today. I don't mean to minimize or criticize you, sir, but I'm reminded of the grief that Joe Biden got for simply saying that the Vice President of the United States is a decent guy, and he had to dial that back. Do you worry about the tone getting worse, even within your own party?
I worry about it no matter where it comes from. If it comes from folks within my party, I'm certainly willing to talk to them and call them on it. And when it comes from the president or somebody else, I think we have to do the same. I think, Neil, one of the things that gets confused is that we can have really fundamental differences, policy differences, and we can have really spirited arguments. But I think where our country is getting off the rails is that the tone and the language that is used to describe one another is gone way beyond where it should. And, you know, in the case of the vice president, or even in my own case, I'll give you an example. I have a really good personal relationship with Mark Meadows. Mark and I came to Congress together. He's a real conservative guy. He's a strong ally and friend of the president's. He and I disagree on almost everything, but we're friends, and we can talk to one another. And I think that says something. The tone that we set has as much to do with our ability to work together when we do agree than it does to argue with one another when we disagree. And I think what we lose is the ability to work together when maybe there's a policy eclipse and we just happen to be on the same side of an issue. If we throw one another under the bus every 5 minutes, the ability to come together around something like infrastructure is going to be lost. And the American people are the losers in that case. So, I do think we all need to dial it back on our side, on their side. I think the president, unfortunately, sets a large a part of the tone here. And I think we have to hold him responsible for that. But nobody gets a pass because we start matching the tone of Donald Trump. I think that's a mistake.
Now, I talked to a Democratic colleague of yours off air, sir, who was saying about Congresswoman Cortez that she should be primaried herself, that she's wrecking the party, destroying its chances. What did you think of that?
See, I think it works both ways. I don't think we should be interfering with one another's politics. The people who elected us get to make those choices. And when Democrats, or for that matter, Republicans, start reaching into other states, into one another's districts, and try to dictate to the voters of a district that they don't represent who should represent them, I think that's an overreach. I'm going to let the people of the district that she represents make that choice. If somebody wants to run against her, that's the system. But I don't think it's a good practice for us to get involved in those races at all.
Congressman Dan Kildee, very good seeing you again. Thank you for getting up on a Saturday to join us. Always a pleasure.
Thanks, Neil.
Dan Kildee. All right, now we've seen a lot of conservative speakers at CPAC, but the one that they're waiting for, the biggest one of all, of course, the President of the United States. What's at stake when he starts speaking after this? All right, getting ready later on in Brooklyn, New York, for a crowd that's already assembled, and quite a few there in Brooklyn, to see Bernie Sanders. He's going to talk about his childhood, growing up in Brooklyn, later on moving to Vermont, becoming the mayor of Burlington, to sort of lay out his philosophy that's been remarkably consistent over the years. He was cool on these issues. He was going to remind people before some of the latest on the left were even born. So that will be something to watch. It's almost exactly time with the president's remarks to CPAC, so it's a tough battle for Antoine, who's going to be joining us shortly, as to which event he watches. We've got the Republican commentator, Joe Borelli, joining us, the aforementioned Democratic strategist, Antoine C. Rye, and Mosnansky and Partners President Lee Carter, a very good read of polls and public opinion, particularly on the Republican side. Lee, I ended with you. Obviously, part of the approach that Bernie Sanders is taking today is, I am a man of the people.
That's right.
These are my roots. I'm consistent. I'm not all over the map. I am who I am.
There's something that people really love about your origin story, about figuring out who it is that you are, why you believe what you believe, and it makes it all authentic and real. So the fact that he can go back to his roots and talk about how he's been believing this all of this time and has lived this life to get to here is something that's going to make people trust him more. And when you have that kind of a story, I think it's smart that you really lean into it, and he does. So he's incredibly authentic, and people really do resonate with that. Now, whether or not people like his policies, that's a different story, but there's a lot of popularity out there for this guy.
You know, and I know polls are all over the map. It's very, very early. He leads in New Hampshire. That's not surprising. He's from neighboring Vermont. So he leads, I think, 4 or 5 points in one of the latest reads over Joe Biden. What do you think of this battle erupting here?
Well, first of all, I take every poll that's going on right now, and I laugh at it because I'm old enough to remember when I was a youngster working for Hillary Clinton in South Carolina in 2007, and Barack Obama was down 20 points, and he went on to win the state very. So, but most of these polls at this point, Neil, are all name ID. And you can't deny the fact that Bernie has some name ID and name recognition. Some of it's geographical. But I'll tell you what I've told everybody. I still think he has a math problem. I still think the heart and soul of the Democratic primary vote is African American. I still think he has some real problems there. And keep in mind, not all the players who are going to be in this race are in yet. And this is a totally different race than it was in 2016. And Bernie's never had to face 2 African-American candidates, a well-qualified and well-oiled machine in Kamala Harris, a Latino candidate, and the dynamics of our party have changed quite a bit. And so while he's enjoying some popularity now, It's all about sustainability.
No one raises money like he does, right? $6 million within 24 hours?
It's not how you start in this business, it's how you finish.
No, I understand
Direction
that,
is far more important than speed.
That blows anyone else away. In terms of, if that's your barometer, you use at least early on.
So far, Biden is not in the race yet.
Right.
So just hold your powder.
If Biden enters the race, he's the automatic front runner in your eyes?
I think the polls indicate that now. I think the challenge for Uncle Joe is to maintain that popularity and run a race that he's never had to run before. This will also be the first time he's run as the former vice president.
Yeah, you're right about that. You know, Joe, the one thing we were mentioning, Joe Biden, maybe it says something to the Democratic Party today, maybe our Times today, that just saying that the Vice President of the United States is a decent guy gets you in a beehive of trouble. Is he an oddity in this year's campaign if he enters because of stuff like that?
Well, I think the Democratic Party might try to frame him as a relic of a bygone era, and to some degree he is. We are far removed from where we were as a country politically than we were, say, in the 2000s and 2010s. I think Biden is going to come in at some point soon, be the elephant in the room, just as Bernie Sanders is now. But as you said before, and as Antoine said earlier, you look back historically, and the people that were at the top of the polls at this point have historically not gone on to do well when it comes to winning the White House.
Right. And
you look at Obama and Clinton and even Jimmy Carter.
Absolutely. You know, Lee, what is interesting to me, and we sometimes overstress this infighting, but it's fairly palpable to me because one of the fortunate things in my job is I get to talk to everybody, you guys, and I get a different read from different folks. But within the Democratic Party, there is this really frenetic, obsessive push to the hard left, led, let's say, by the Congresswoman Cortez's. And then you have a House leader like Dan Kildee here just a couple of minutes ago saying that approach to look after punishing or keeping a list of Democrats who vote with Republicans, that's not good. Not good for the party, not good for governing. So there is this sort of, battle for the party's soul going on.
There is, but it's much like what the Republicans went through in 2015. Absolutely. What kind of party are we going to be?
In 2010.
And when you've got this many different candidates that are running, that's exactly what it is. It is a battle for who they are and who they want to be. And is it going to be the party of the far left? I'm not sure that it is. Is it going to be the party of the past? We're going to see if Joe Biden's going to resonate right now. And I think there is a lot of...
But do you think she's getting, that is, Cortez is getting a little ahead of her skis, making threats like that?
I don't think she is, not because I like what she's doing necessarily, but this is who she is, and this is why she's getting so much attention. And because she is, look, she is setting the agenda that we're all talking about almost on a daily basis.
You're absolutely right. But Antoine, let me ask you about that, because thehill.com is out right now with a survey, I guess, of CPAC attendees. I'm sorry I took you away from that event. Anyway, they say that Joe Biden, in their mind, poses, to your point, the greatest threat to the president. He's the one I guess they fear the most. What do you think?
Well, I think that Joe Biden, better known as America's Uncle Joe, most people view him as the person who can bring the many corners of the Democratic Party together. And depending on, if he's the nominee, depending on who he puts on the ticket with him, could really be a game changer, not just for the White House, but also for other races that will be on the ballot. But Mia, make no mistake, we're talking about a battle for the party soul. We're going through growing pains right now, so we're being stretched. However, I do think the party has to understand, particularly our new members, we have to win races outside of New York, California,
You
Massachusetts.
might just be grabbing defeat from the jaws of victory, though.
This is a marathon, not a sprint. I
see what you did.
I am confident. I am confident that we will come together in the end, but I think we have to tread careful.
All right. We're going to be back with Joe Borelli a little later in the show talking about Amazon and the governor's quest to make sure they don't wander. But they are wandering. We'll have a lot more after this. You're watching Cavuto Live. Well, North Korea's leader Kim Jong-un says he is open to another summit with President Trump. The Pentagon has already said it is suspending 2 large-scale joint military exercises with South Korea. This, of course, after the president walked away from the table. The North Koreans say they walked away from the table. Walking away from a table is not necessarily a sign of awful things to come. Remember, Ronald Reagan did that in Iceland with Mikhail Gorbachev, and in a different time, in a different era, John F. Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev did not get off to a great start when they first met. Different times, different presidents, different approaches, but a rough start doesn't mean, and in the end, a failed approach. Let's go to the former Assistant Secretary of State under President George H.W. Bush, Robert Charles. Secretary, good to have you.
Thank you.
Many have read into that failure to secure a deal, that it was a waste of time. What do you think?
Well, analogies can be overdrawn, but this one I think may be closer than people realize. In 1986, Ronald Reagan did walk out on Gorbachev. And what came out of that was a series of breakthroughs, not war, because for the first time, Gorbachev really realized that Reagan meant what he said. He was not going to give up the Strategic Defense Initiative. And what came out of that, interestingly, is that once the two men had baselined each other's points of view, and they had gotten into a summit, they had had a summit 1 year earlier that was not very successful. They were at an impasse. All of a sudden at Reykjavik, things were very hopeful, and then they crashed. And what happened after that is that within a year, you had the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Agreement, which eliminated more than 2,600 nuclear weapons. And actually before, just after Reagan left office, he had started the negotiations on the START agreement. It got inked in 1991. And that agreement got rid of 80% of all nuclear weapons in the world. So remarkably, sometimes a walkout gives you a baseline to think things through again. And I'll be honest, I'm a little bit more optimistic than the average person, because as I look at Kim Jong-un, I see two things possibly happening in his future. The first is if there's another summit and he can bring himself to understand the economic advantages that come from an agreement to get rid of all the nuclear weapons and the vulnerability that attaches to having those nuclear weapons, that could be treated, including China, when he starts to move forward. So it's the future is very foggy, and nuclear negotiations take a long, long time. But there's more hope there, I think, than there is reason to be disappointed.
If you were the president, Robert, would you hold off on any meetings until you had a sense going there that you would be signing off on something?
Well, the normal course of events is that you have a framework agreement, and the framework agreement is agreed by staff ahead of time, and then you show up and sort of do the diplomatic piece. This president is very hands-on. He's very engaged personally. And you can say, gosh, that hangs everything out there right out in the open. But at the same time, I think I would say get your staffs working together on something that pushes in the direction that I just mentioned, some kind of breakthrough that allows Kim to understand he could be a transformational leader like a Gorbachev. He could have a more open economy. Their economy is, although it's hurting under the sanctions, and we should ramp those up and keep China's feet to the fire. At the same time, believe it or not, there is a subterranean economy over there that suggests that maybe he really understands the future is with supply and demand and not with command and control.
Do you ever get a sense, though, Robert, that the North Korean leader is kind of in over his head, that he's overwhelmed, that, and that either he ignores the people around him who hope to countenance deals that will be of some substance, or they're running the show. But whatever the case, he doesn't impress. And that contrary to the kind of things the president has said about him, maybe the president's not really impressed.
So that's probably true. He's young, but there are advantages in being young. When he looks at the future, his future is a lot longer than his father's or grandfather's at the time they took control. So in reality here, I think he has the potential ultimately to make himself into a transformational leader. You're right. I mean, Neil, he's not Gorbachev. Gorbachev was a seasoned former member of the Politburo.
Right.
He was old by the time he started negotiating with Reagan, who was older. But at the end of the day, hope comes from believing there is a possible future that is in accord with the other side. And I do believe here that his other futures are dim. And if he looks at this one closely, he can see himself as an economically transformational leader. And, people say, one last point, people say, well, this was a human rights abuser. He's killed people right and left. How could we ever negotiate with him? Remember that when Gorbachev came to the table the first time, he was running the gulags, and he was as egregious a human rights leader. And what happened at the summit in Reykjavik? He started out, and from that point forward, put human rights on the table and said, I understand this is something we've got to do better at.
Well put, Robert. Thank you for the history reminders as well. Robert Charles, before I move out here, I just want to let you know that we're getting word out of Nigeria of a pipeline explosion. 50 people are missing after pipeline explosion. This is one co-run right now by Shell Petroleum Development Company. Again, we don't know the source of the shutdown, whether it was sabotage. We do know Nigeria is an OPEC member, and that oil that, would be presumably missing on the markets would be an issue for them to deal with next week. In the meantime, if you thought that Michael Cohen hearing was captivating, just wait. There are plenty more, a lot more after this.
do you look for when you trade?
American people deserve to know whether Donald Trump is functionally a president or an organized crime boss.
This president has lied. Collusion or obstruction of justice. We're talking about finances. We're talking about the foundation. This really needs to be investigated and explored.
I think that President Trump, frankly, headed up what can only be described as a criminal enterprise.
All right, never mind until waiting for all the facts. Man, where are we going with this? Obviously, they're talking about getting ready for still more probes and trying to squeeze more out of Michael Cohen before he hops off to jail for 3 years. Republican Congressman Mark Green is part of that House Oversight Committee that had a chance to talk to Cohen. Congressman, what do you think of that? The president's guilty of every sin in the book as a result.
Now, this is ridiculous. So the best witness they've got, Neil, and by the way, thanks for having me on the show.
Good to have you.
The best witness they've got is Michael Cohen, a guy who lied multiple times to the IRS, lied on financial documents, lied to Congress, and he's the witness to Congress. It's pretty ridiculous. It just shows who they are. It shows, the president is across the world in Vietnam strategically trying to bring about peace in the world, and all they care about is taking out the president. I mean, it's ridiculous.
But, Congress, I didn't hear a lot of your colleagues on the right defend the president. Obviously, you're going after the guy who was passing all of this information along, and he's a convicted liar. He's going up to jail because he lied to Congress. But some of his statements, everything from, he's a crook, can't be trusted, he's anti-gay, he's a racist. The substance of the remarks were never challenged by Republicans. I wonder why that is.
Oh, I think a lot of us went after the things that he said. I mean, from the comments about his job and not wanting a job with the White House. I mean, we took him on that. We took him on his foreign contracts issues. I mean, we really went after his credibility.
No, you did, and I don't mean to blur those lines, sir. I guess what I caught is when someone says something over the top about someone, let's just say who I like or care for, somebody, whether a friend or a relative, and I don't defend that friend or relative on some outlandish comments, the racist thing, he's a crooked businessman thing, and all this other stuff. I just wondered why that is.
Well, from the racist standpoint, we talk about that. That conversation did come up. Even Congressman Tlaib accused Mark Meadows of being a racist, and there was a lot of pushback on that.
Right, I remember.
But it's very interesting. AOC and the Democrats are out there being critical of the president as a racist, being critical of us. We are anti-diversity, and yet if you don't think exactly like she does, she's going to put you on a list. I mean, that hypocrisy is mind-boggling, and we're taking that on.
So if they're going to take that, the Democrats with still more Cohen hearings, and with or without Cohen, once he's in jail, hearings based on what he said, either at a public forum or one behind closed doors, what are we looking at here? Where is this all going?
Oh, it's absolutely going towards impeachment. I mean, these guys they hate Donald Trump, and they're going to do everything they can to try to take him out.
Do they tell you that? Do some of your Democratic colleagues whisper and say, this is where we're going with this?
No one's come up to me, Neil, and said, hey, this is our grand strategy, but it's pretty obvious from what they're doing, I think.
All right, so what do you think the president should do in response? Now, he tweets the credibility issue of Michael Cohen, and that's fair game because Michael Cohen has been seen and reported on tape saying great things about the president, what a savvy businessman he is, how open he is to all races and people, and then just the opposite this hearing. So I get that and see that. But they're going to use him nevertheless to say that he opened up a can of worms here. Do you think he opened up a can of worms?
No, I don't think so at all. I mean, their goal is to just, it's like Bush lied, people died, and they're going to just say it over and over again and hope that it sinks in. They're going to continue to say that Donald Trump is a racist. It's their game plan. They just keep repeating it over and over again in hopes that it sinks in and people accept it. And we're going to continue to push back. Again, Mark Meadows brought up a worker who was a part of the Trump organization who said, no, I don't work for racists. And then he got accused of being a racist for bringing that up. So, we're going to push back, and we're going to show the flaws in their reasoning, and we're going to talk about our president. And what he should do is just continue doing what he's doing, working with North Korea. There's going to be another summit. I mean, the way that worked out was just perfectly. And
do you think there's going to be another summit? Do you think there should be another summit?
Absolutely. I mean,
wouldn't you have to have more stuff nailed down before the president goes to the trouble?
No, I don't think so. And let me explain. I think a lot of old school politics are about let's get the issue solved and then let's get the two leaders together. Kim Jong-un is a young guy, and what I think Donald Trump wants to do is move his ideology, and that's going to take a relationship. Earlier in your show, you had someone talking about Gorbachev and Reagan, and they developed a relationship that led to change. And I think that's what Donald Trump's doing. He's working on a relationship with this young man and young leader.
You don't think that, the president really did go much more than halfway? I think any objective observer can say that. He traveled halfway around the world last summer to go to Singapore to meet this guy. Did it all over again when the guy took a 2-hour train ride to get to the Vietnam summit. Yeah. And he goes 10 or 11 hours, I'm just wondering, what do you get for that?
Well, I think you get a deepening relationship that hopefully, and there's no guarantees here, but hopefully moves the young man's ideology a little bit. Because if we're going to get, a cooperative agreement with them, if we're going to get capitalism in North Korea, it's going to take an ideologic change on the part of Kim Jong-un. And just working out the details like it's a new NAFTA agreement and then let's talk, that's ridiculous. That's not going to work here. It's about winning a heart relationship with Kim Jong-un, and I think that's what the president's doing. He's playing chess. You've heard the expression before. He's playing chess and others are playing checkers, and I think that's exactly what's going on. He's working on a heart relationship with Kim Jong-un.
All right, we'll see. Congressman, thank you for coming in on Saturday.
Thanks,
Good
Neil.
seeing you. All right, well, the Dow's finally snapped that winning streak. It had gone on for 9 weeks, but in case you think you missed your cash karma moment, the guy who literally wrote the book on it says, no, you haven't, after this. All right, well, after 9 weeks, it stops. 9 straight winning weeks for the Dow, and it ended. But it's a streak that still has the Dow off to the best performance we've seen in the better part of 3+ decades. NASDAQ racing ahead as well. But these weekly changes, even if they come to a halt right now, what do? Do you feel like you've missed the opportunity? Market guru Dan Geltrude says, you step back and you look at the fundamentals here. He talks a lot about that in Positive Financial Karma. It's a very interesting read on things. And what makes it interesting is it's not highfalutin business advice or big words and acronyms and terms that just make you think you're watching CNBC. It just speaks English, and it gets to the core of a guy who's a practicing Buddhist. So he's a little weird, but I'm telling you, he's brilliant. Dan Geltrude is his name. Positive Financial Karma is the book. Good to see you, my friend.
Thank you for having me, Neil.
Yeah, the Buddhism thing, I joke about it, not to joke about it, but that's part of the thinking here. Explain.
Yeah, the basic premise of Buddhism, when you talk about karma and action and reaction and that boomerang effect of the things you do, very important. But it comes down to this. It's cause and effect, right? What's the cause and effect of all the things that happen? And if you step back and say, well, we see the effect. What caused that? And keep it simple, Neil. If we do that, we can really uncover a lot of things and be successful in a very simple way.
Well, a lot of it is very to the point advice. I mean, when it comes to losing weight, you got to, eat less, exercise more, move more, to your point. More. Now, when it comes to investing, what do you do? Because the simple take on this is maybe stocks gotten a little rich, you hold off. What do you say?
Well, what I say is, and I talk about this in the book, keep the emotion out of it. The fundamentals, Neil. What are the things that the causes that give you the effect that you want? What's your investment strategy? Stay the course. Don't get swayed by the headlines, by all the noise. I think people in this world that we live in with immediate gratification, news constantly, 24/7, you have to step back and tune that out and say, I'm going to stick with the fundamentals.
All right, well, how do the
what
fundamentals apply now? If you had 9 straight weeks of Dow advances, we're off to a very strong start to the year. 9 times out of 10, that means the rest of the year is going to be strong. So there are a lot of people who just say, all right, I'm going to follow that. Well, they get in love with being in a market that's getting all this buzz and attention. What do you tell them?
Well, right now, if you're invested in NASDAQ and you see what's been happening over the last 10 weeks, you say, hey, fundamentally what I'm doing is working. But now step back and say, how long is that going to continue to work? Will that strategy stay the course? Again, noise out. Focus in on what the plan is, because clearly it's working. If you go back to December and you were paying attention to the noise, you would have panicked, pulled out and missed this run that we've had for the last couple of months.
But if you get into this run-up, you could be equally blamed for getting caught up in the froth and getting screwed all over.
Absolutely. So
what do you tell people? Depends on your time frame, right?
Right. So if you're already in, stay in, ride it, believe in the fundamentals and how you invest your money, Neil.
And that's where you get the good karma. All right, Dan Geltrude, Positive Financial Karma. He's the author of a very uncanny read on things without trying to talk way over your head. So he could never be a financial TV anchor. He could, actually. Let's take a look at the Amazon situation in New York City. Not too far from me, they were going to build a spanking new headquarters in Long Island City. That's not happening. Now, New York's governor has come out to say, Jeff, is there a way you can reconsider, please? Pretty please?